Knicks fans, they're turning on Karl-Anthony Towns. Over last week, Karl-Anthony Towns got ripped apart by Knicks fans, Jason, for a play that happened where he drove to the basket, slipped as he was getting up from the floor, and didn't get quite back onto the other end, didn't hustle back, and Knicks fans ripped into him for it. I think the replay itself didn't look quite as bad as it seemed like from the broadcast angle, but still, it did exemplify the lack of effort you often see from Karl-Anthony Towns. Do you think the criticism of Cat is fair?
I do, but less so for that specific clip to the point that you're trying to make. Like, I think you can find various examples of that kind of lapse in effort from stars this time of year quite a bit. One of the things that I think is really funny about the NBA is like you have these teams that come out and they look great to start the season. And then inevitably you get into that December, January stretch, and it's just that's where the 82 game grind really starts to wear on you, and some lapses in focus and intensity can start to come up. And then there are usually these teams that get off to disappointing starts, and they end up getting into December and January, and they're desperately trying to save their season, and so they can play some of the best basketball that they play all season. Look at Golden State and the Clippers, for example. But like what I look at with the Knicks is they're just a textbook example of a team that I thought got off to an excellent start this season, like a really, really great start. And as a team, they've started to just kind of lose a little bit of that defensive intensity and focus on a possession-to-possession basis. And so with Cat in particular, he kind of is what he is to me. I'm more concerned about his mistake making than him necessarily playing hard in a big moment. So for instance, like he's just had a couple of these mistakes this year that fall in line with the rest of his career, where in a big spot late in the game, he'll make an execution error. Like there was a game against the Celtics where he chased Jordan Walsh off of a corner three when Jordan had only made 3 corner threes all season to that point. And he drove past him and got a layup. It was a huge blow to the Knicks in that game. Or in the Spurs game where he stops paying attention to Luke Cornett crashing out of the corner and gives up an and one offensive rebound that ends up basically costing them that game. There are a lot of examples of that like that in the postseason in the past, where he'll make a critical execution error defensively in a big spot. That I think is a bigger picture issue with the Knicks that isn't going away. This recent stretch to me is more they have to play super hard to cover for Cat and Brunson anyway. And so when they relax, their defense just falls off of a cliff. And that's more or less what we've been seeing over the last month.
Well, and I think you're hitting on the source of the frustration with the Knicks. When it came to that play, it was just one of many moments, and it wasn't even the most significant one of all, the one that was most detrimental to the team. And I think when you look at the player himself and then you factor in his salary, the money that he's making, Karl-Anthony Towns this year is making $53.1 million, goes up to $57 million next year, then $61 million in the final year of his deal in 27-28 as a player option for that deal. And so when you consider Karl-Anthony Towns is making max player money, but he is not a leading scorer, he is not an anchor of your defense, he's just really one of the guys on your team making max player money. You tie that all together for Knicks fans, that's where it's like, geez, we've been teased with the idea of trading this guy for Giannis. We didn't even have to make this trade for Karl-Anthony Towns. Looking at what Julius Randle is doing in Minnesota, as frustrating as he was, this guy's even worse. And so for Knicks fans, I think, understandably so, you're pointing fingers in certain directions. Karl-Anthony Towns is definitely the most easily improvable spot if you can turn him into something. What is the fix for the Knicks, Jason? Is the fix possible with Cat, or is it only something that can happen without Karl-Anthony Towns for them to actually take the next step in the postseason?
This is where it's just about being realistic about what Cat's trade value is. I don't see any universe where you can turn him into something that tangibly improves the team. And so ultimately, what you have to look at is there have been stretches with Cat where it looked good. Specifically, you look at the Celtics series last year. I thought last year was mostly full of disappointments for the Knicks. I thought they underachieved in the regular season. They really struggled against the best teams in the league. They didn't exactly dominate Detroit, and then they completely decomposed against Indiana. But there was this ceiling that we saw in the Celtics series where the wings were able to do enough to cover for Brunson and Cat defensively. And then we've seen that for large chunks of the start of this season as well. And so there is a ceiling there that's worth trying to pursue, but I don't see any universe where they can get off of Cat and improve the team. So the best thing they can do is attempt to rectify things in-house with what they've got. I mean, unless you've heard something in terms of an option for them to flip Cat, I haven't seen anything that makes sense that another team would be interested in terms of taking Cat on with the amount of money remaining on his deal.
No, I don't think there's anything midseason. I think for the Knicks, if it's something involving Karl-Anthony Towns, it's waiting for the summer and praying that Giannis Antetokounmpo, with at that time only 1 year remaining on his contract, forces his way to you. And in that case, the Knicks would have another tradable first available, because then 2033 first would be available. They'd have the ability to flip Cat to another team and get some assets back. I don't think it'd be anything until the summer involving Karl-Anthony Towns. I think in the meantime for the Knicks, if they can get back to playing some, with more motion and movement on offense, and then also playing with two bigs. Cat just quite simply is not a 5. He needs to play the 4. He needs to play more often next to Mitchell Robinson and Ariel Hekporti. I think that's the key for the Knicks with the hand they've been dealt. You just can't play with Cat at the 5 as often as they have. I thought early in the season, Jason, it seemed like Mike Brown was going to use two bigs a lot more often, and he has in spurts when Josh Hart's been out. But I think he doesn't have a choice. I think if you're Mike Brown, you have to go to two bigs more often with Karl-Anthony Towns.
Do you think he's been leaning into that more as an attempt to continue to drive that kind of drive and kick mentality for the Knicks on offense that's been generating for them so many more catch and shoot threes? I think, like, even though I agree with you in principle and the idea, I think that's been the thought process. Is I think Mike's been indexing more towards ball handling. One of the subtle strengths of this Knicks team is they have a lot of good ball handlers. You know, even when you dig into their bench and you look at Jordan Clarkson and you look at Deuce McBride and you look at Tyler Kolek, they've just got a lot of dudes who can put the ball on the floor. And I think he's been leaning into that space and dribble penetration to generate quality threes. But ultimately, to your point, they can't guard well enough with Cat at the 5. And so I think trying to strike that balance more would certainly go a long way.
Yeah, I do think that's certainly an element of it. And Josh Hart is critical in that as well. And if Josh Hart is not knocking down a ton of shots, if he's not getting the respect of the defense, it's very hard to then play Mitchell Robinson or Hekporti out there as a second big. But that's ultimately what I think the Knicks at least have to experiment with more often moving forward in the season. And, hope to God, Karl-Anthony Towns, you get the good version of him come postseason time.